Have you ever wondered why some dentists seem to be more successful than others? Many would put it down to hard work. They say all you got to do is show up, work really hard, be consistent, and you're going to be successful. Well, how do you explain two dentists who work equally hard, equally consistent, but one of them seems to be more successful than the other? Stick around to the end of the video and you'll know exactly why some are more successful than others. If you're new to the channel, my name is Siju Jacob. I've been a private practitioner for the past 25 years in Bangalore and Dubai. I've been using a surgical microscope in my private practice for more than 20 years, and I've been training dentists how to incorporate the surgical microscope in everyday clinical practice for more than a decade. If you've been here before and you found some value in the videos that I post every week, then don't forget to click on that subscribe button so that you get notified every time I upload a new video, which is usually every Sunday. You can also subscribe to my weekly newsletter. I've put the link in the description below so that you get even more useful information delivered right into your inbox every week. What if some dentists who succeed have some unfair advantages over their competitors? And what if each of us found out that we all have our own unique unfair advantages that we can leverage to become successful in our careers? And what if we knew what these unfair advantages that we possess are so that we can pursue a path which would enable us to leverage these unfair advantages that we have? This is exactly what we are going to talk about this week in our book club, where I dissect some of the lessons that I picked up from this book, The Unfair Advantage by Ash Ali and Hassan Kuba, and how these insights can be leveraged in dentistry so that we can become more successful. First, let's clarify what we mean by unfair advantage. I'll give you the story of a friend of mine. We met on the first day of dental school. I was from Kerala and I had this guy who was also from Kerala comes up to me and talks to me in Malayalam. He says, your name's Siju. That means you're probably from Kerala. I'm from Kerala too. And I said, yep, I'm from Kerala. And he starts talking to me in fluent Malayalam. And the story goes that he doesn't know a word of English. It's the first time that he's come out of Kerala. And he was so glad that he found a fellow Malayali to talk to. So here he was, a Malayali boy who knew only Malayalam on day one of dental school, didn't speak a word of English. So he found a lot of the curriculum very difficult. But to his credit, he went through the course and over a period of 5 years, by the time he left, he could speak English. So here he was, this Malayali boy chatting with me on day one, didn't know a word of English, and he had challenges, but to his credit, he stuck with it. And then he finished his dentistry, then went back to Kerala and he opened a general practice in his hometown in Kerala. I bumped into him 20 years later. I visited his hometown and I found that he had opened this hugely successful practice, a multi-chaired practice, one of the largest in his hometown, and he was super successful in his hometown as a dentist. Patients loved him. Successful in every metric that you can think of. Now, this is an example of someone who leveraged his unfair advantage. His unfair advantage was that he fit in very well with his community back in Kerala. He could speak fluent Malayalam. He was well versed in the culture. He got along very nicely with his patients because it was very easy for him to build rapport in the local language. And he had a pleasant personality and he had a good hand. So he was a good clinician. So this is a great example of someone who leveraged the advantages that he had, the unfair advantages that he had, to build a super successful career in his hometown. Like my friend here, each of us have one or more of these unfair advantages that we can leverage to become successful in our dental careers. How do we find out what those advantages are is the insight that the authors describe in this book, The Unfair Advantage. So what is the framework? Is there a framework that we can use? The authors describe something called the Miles Framework, M-I-L-E-S. Now, what exactly is the Miles Framework? M stands for money. So if you have the benefit of being comfortable financially, then that becomes an unfair advantage over someone who is starting out with absolutely no financial security. They say money doesn't solve all your problems, but it does solve your money problem. So if you are someone who's born into a wealthy family, if your parents have already cleared all your dental school bills for you, you don't have any loans, they can give you a surplus amount to start with your practice initially, then all these become financial advantages where you're not under pressure to start earning from day one. You have backup financially. So that's an unfair advantage which you can leverage. However, understand that just because you're not wealthy or you don't have money doesn't mean that it's a disadvantage. You can use that as fuel to work hard, because you can go all in because you have nothing to lose. You don't have any money to start with. So you can use that as fuel. So it's not the end of the world. However, having some form of financial benefit or having someone who can support you financially in the early stages of your career is a huge unfair advantage which you can leverage. I stands for intelligence and insight. When we say intelligence, it's not just how well you are at studies, it can also be emotional intelligence. So this is again something that you can figure out. What are your strengths in terms of intelligence? Are you someone who's very good at studies? If yes, then yes, you can do your post-graduation, you can do PhD, you can pursue academic pathways. Again, a bit of honest self-introspection. You can figure out if, let's say, you're not someone who's brilliant at studies. Let's say you're someone who's never really topped the class all these years, but you might be someone who has a very high EQ or emotional quotient. You found some clues that you're very good with people. You understand people, their emotions, their sentiments. You're very, very good at managing all kinds of people. So that shows that you have a very high emotional quotient. So that could be an unfair advantage. So all these are clues that you can do a little bit of self-introspection and find out what is your intelligence and what is the insight that you have. By insight, we mean that two people look at the same problem and one person has some sort of insight which the other person doesn't have. So that also is an example of an unfair advantage that you can use to leverage your career. L in the Miles framework stands for location and luck. By location, it means where you are born, where you do your education. For example, if you are born and brought up in a city like Bangalore, it's a lot easier for you to integrate in that city rather than someone who's born and brought up in a small town to move into a city and then build a practice. And vice versa. If you are someone who is, say, born in a small town, then it's a lot easier for you to set up practice in that town rather than move into a city. So yeah, location does matter, and you can use location as a form of unfair advantage. Luck again plays a huge role. We all hear stories of being in the right place at the right time, meeting the right people. So all those are unfair advantages which some people can leverage. However, there is a saying that the harder you work, the luckier you get, and there is some truth to that. The more actions you do, the more you put yourself out there, the more chances you give for luck to enter into your life. So let's say you take the example of two dentists. Each of them, they start a clinic, and both of them are equally hardworking. Both of them go to the clinic at 10 o'clock in the morning and sit there till like 8 p.m. However, one just sits in the clinic waiting for patients to come, whereas the other one is doing a lot of stuff. They're going to dental camps, they're doing lectures because they're good at giving lectures. Maybe the other dentist is good in social media, so they're putting up Instagram posts. They're doing a lot of activities. So the more activities they do, the more chances they give themselves to be discovered by someone, and the more chances they give for luck to enter their life. So that's how we look at luck. You should give more opportunities for luck to enter your life, and that usually happens by action. The more actions you take, the luckier you get. So that's how you would look at leveraging luck to gain an unfair advantage over others. E stands for education and expertise. Dentistry is a technical profession, so if you have some form of education which somebody else doesn't have, then that becomes your unfair advantage. We give the example of microscopes. You could look at an online course like the one I have, Microscopic Dentistry Simplified. You could enroll for the course, you would learn about microscopes, and then you would buy the microscope, and suddenly you have education and expertise over someone who doesn't know how to use a microscope. So that becomes your unfair advantage. So that's one example. Or let's take the example of someone who learned how to do implants, and then they practice implants. They've been doing implants for 10 years. Now suddenly they have an unfair advantage of placing implants in their clinic, which someone who doesn't know how to put implants won't have. So that again is an example of unfair advantage that you can leverage: expertise and education. And finally, S in the Miles framework stands for status. Status, again, is an unfair advantage which you can leverage. If you've spent some time in a certain field in dentistry and over a period of time you've gained some sort of status, then you will get some opportunities which other people cannot get, and that becomes an unfair advantage. At the risk of sounding pompous, I'll give you my own example. I have been practicing microscopes for more than 20 years. I've been teaching dentists how to use a surgical microscope for more than 10 years. So a combination of these two, the fact that I've been using microscope for such a long time, for more than 20 years, and the fact that I have so many students that I've taught for the last 10 years gives me some sort of a status which I can use, I can leverage, and someone else who's, say, just been using microscope for 3 or 4 years will not have that same amount of status purely because I've been doing something for a long time. So that's an example of status. So when it comes to microscopes, I might have some sort of an unfair advantage over somebody else who's just starting out. So that's an example of using status as a leverage or using status as an unfair advantage to progress in your career. So we can use the Miles framework to figure out what are the unique unfair advantages that each of us possess, and then we can use them as clues to progress along a certain direction so that we can grow in our careers. Now, the authors in this book also suggest that you need to have something called a reality growth mindset. What is a reality growth mindset? There's a scientist at Stanford called Carol Dweck, and she has this philosophy called growth mindset. Now, she says that human beings fall into two categories: those who have a fixed mindset and those who have a growth mindset. People who have a fixed mindset feel that there are certain qualities that are given to you when you're born and you're kind of stuck with it. There's nothing you can do to improve. Whereas people who have a growth mindset feel that nothing is static. You can keep on progressing in whatever path you choose, provided you put in the effort. So they don't believe that anything is fixed. The abilities that you're given is fixed. They believe that you can keep on growing. So the authors in this book are of the opinion that rather than dividing people into fixed mindset and growth mindset, you should have a third category called the reality growth mindset. What is reality growth mindset? It means that you need to have an honest evaluation of yourself and find out what are the branches or what are the directions in which you can grow, or you can leverage your unfair advantages so that you have a far better chance of growth rather than those areas where your chances are limited. Let's say someone wants to be a basketball player. Now, if you are someone who is, let's say, 5 feet tall, then you will have a disadvantage when it comes to basketball. So you'd rather not choose basketball as a career if you are 5 feet to start with, because you'd rather start with something else that suits your height rather than put yourself in a disadvantage to start off with. So that's what we call reality growth mindset. So to summarize, what we call reality mindset is you kind of put your head in the clouds, but you plant your feet firmly on the ground. So you kind of choose certain directions which you know that you have an unfair advantage so that you can excel in those fields rather than randomly choose fields where you don't have an unfair advantage. That's known as reality growth mindset. So what are the key takeaways that we can get from this book, The Unfair Advantage, that we can use in dentistry so that we can become successful in our dental careers? The first thing is to understand that every one of us has some form of unfair advantage that we can use to leverage in our dental careers. Now, the trick is to sit and have an honest introspection and find out what are these unfair advantages that we possess. And once we know what those unfair advantages are, then it makes sense to choose career paths where we can leverage those unfair advantages. So this is lesson number 1. Lesson number 2 is that each of these advantages are interconnected. So you have one advantage, then you have another advantage, and then you have a third advantage. Find a way to combine these 3 advantages. That would make it a lot more powerful and more synergistic rather than having one advantage alone. The third lesson that you can take away from this book is that sometimes disadvantages can become advantages. Let's say you're someone who doesn't have any money to start with. Rather than say, oh, I don't have any money and I'm stuck, you can use that as fuel. Because if you don't have money, you're starting from scratch anyway. You have nothing to lose. So you probably will work extra hard than the guy who has a lot of money so that he doesn't feel the drive. So just because you don't have any of these advantages doesn't mean that it's an absolute disadvantage. Sometimes what you don't have can be used as a fuel so that you can work extra hard and grow in a certain direction. So that's another way to look at it. That's lesson number 3. Lesson number 4 is the purpose of doing this exercise, finding out whether or not you have some unfair advantage or not, is not to make excuses. It's about leveraging what you have. It's about making some honest assumptions about what your strengths and weaknesses are, and then channeling your career in a direction which will align with those strengths and not with weaknesses. That's how you look at it. Lesson number 5 is you don't need all the 5 unfair advantages. You just need 1 or 2, and that's good enough. Once you figure out what 1 or 2 are your biggest unfair advantages, then you can put all your efforts into leveraging those unfair advantages. And finally, mindset is the key. You need to have a reality growth mindset. Find out honestly what are my strengths. And then once you find out, put all your efforts in a direction where you can align your growth with those unfair advantages rather than put yourself into some sort of a situation where you have lesser chances. So those are the key takeaways that I learned from this book called Unfair Advantages. So I hope that this kind of helps the young dentist who's just starting your career, or even the dentist who's been around for 4 or 5 years and hasn't seen much of success. If you enjoyed that content, then maybe you would enjoy my weekly newsletter, which is a short email that I send out every Wednesday. It's usually filled with some useful dental and non-dental information. I've put the link in the description below. Do have a look and subscribe to my weekly newsletter called Wisdom Wednesdays. Don't forget to click on that subscribe button so that you get notified every time I upload a new video, which is usually every Sunday. And if you enjoy content like this, then maybe you should check out some of my other videos on this channel coming up over here. I'll see you next week with another video. Till then, take care. Thanks for watching.